I've been involved with close to 1,000 exhibitions, directly involved one way or another, as a juror, as a curator, as a co-curator, as a venue for exhibiting work, traveling exhibitions. I've traveled exhibitions. I really feel like it's time for me. It's time for me to rest. When you lay in a hospital bed for 8 months, you have lots of time to think. And I was laying there at one point saying, I got shit I gotta do. So instead of a bucket list, I've got a shit I've gotta do list. I was born in Colorado Springs in 1941. My mother's side of my family, for whatever reason, have been involved in the cleaning business. She had been working in a cleaning plant in Colorado Springs. Her sister, her mother, her brother, her sister-in-law, the whole damn family was in Shelton, Washington. And that's where I grew up and went off to Whitman College, purportedly the Stanford of the North. Not really, but they like to think that. I really wanted to go to Reed, but it was too liberal for my parents. And Whitman was just right. So I went there. I was in a fraternity. I partied a lot. I dated most sorority girls, and it just got to be too small, and I was beginning to realize that I wasn't what I was purported to be, and I was probably gay, but I needed to go somewhere and figure that out. So I transferred to the University of Washington. I became an English major at the University of Washington. What do? They teach or nothing. So I'd done publications and things like that with the fraternity, so I thought, well, maybe I'd get something in printing or advertising or whatever. And I looked around San Francisco. Well, of course, it was San Francisco in the 60s. I went to my first gay pride parade there, and I actually came out to myself and my friends, not to my family. I had let my hair grow and I had a mustache, and my father was apoplectic. He thought I was a hippie, and he took me aside and said, your mother is really concerned. Would you go and get a haircut? I said, I would do anything for my mother. And I did it. I got my haircut. Well, then I left, came back, and then decided that Howard was right, Howard Young, that I could live in Houston and probably find a job, because it was the recession big time in the airplane industry and anything else in Washington State. And San Francisco, I knew it would eat me alive. It was the peak of the gay culture, and I was out drinking in the Castro, in Lower Market. I mean, it was just Katie bar the door. It was just wild in San Francisco. And so I came to Houston. For the first 6 months, I was a Manny for Howard and his wife Mildred and their 3 kids. The person that got me to come here, the international president of the fraternity. And so I came and I stayed at their house, and I took care of the kids, you know, when they were out, when they were busy, whatever. And finally, I did some interviewing. I got a job with an interior design company called Peter Zane Designs in Town and Country Village. No experience except that I was gay. I'm not sure that's why they hired me, but Forrest Garling, who ended up being my first partner, worked there. He got me the interview. This is when the big boom out by the airport in Champions, that's where all these housing developments going up, and they all needed carpet, and he had contracts with some of the biggest, like Goetti, and some of the really smaller ones that then became, like David Weekley, became a lot bigger. So I was in my car going out in all these subdivisions, measuring houses in the summer, in the heat, with shit in the corners of the closets where the workmen just decided that's where they went to the bathroom. And I'm measuring, and I'm going, opening the door and saying, I can guess that that's about a 4x3 closet. When I was in college, I was one of the few people that was really interested in art at that time, in the early 60s. And there was a gallery in Seattle, the only really good gallery, and it was in the University District, not far from from where I lived and worked. And Otto was the dealer for Mark Toby, because Toby had been in Seattle and then moved to Switzerland, and he remained being his dealer. And I was in there one day and saw this little Mark Toby monoprint, and I said, I really love that. I'd like to buy it, but I can only pay you $50 a month. It was $500. And I said, I can only pay you $50 a month. And he said, that's fine. He was this great Jewish German dealer with very not very different from Tibor Denaj. Once I started working with Tibor, who was Hungarian, but the same kind of gentleman. And I said, thank you very much. And he handed it to me, and I said, you don't know who I am? I can't. He said, I know you will pay me. And I said, okay. And I brought a check for $50 every month. I worked as a houseboy at the Theta House, washing dishes to make that money. And I took him a check, and at the end of it, he said, now aren't you happy you've bought your first piece of art? And I've never forgotten how easy he made it for me to do that. So then when I started working for the fraternity, the headquarters was in Oxford, Ohio, where Miami University is. There would be these traveling print dealers who would come to town and have this assortment of prints. And I found out about it, and I went and I thought, well, I can afford these. And so I started buying them for probably $50, $75. And then Leo Castelli's daughter opened a gallery in Cleveland, of all places. And I happened to be there traveling, working for the fraternity, and there was a Jim Dine print there. The Jim Dine was within my price range, so I bought a Jim Dine, which is now at the Museum of Fine Arts, as is the Toby, are many of the other things. I bought a few more things as I traveled, because I traveled from Halifax to Vancouver to San Diego to Miami for 2 years, and then off and on for another 3 years. And so I got to go to a lot of museums, a lot of galleries, and look at a lot of art. Well, I went to New York to meet Tibor, and we hit it off immediately. And I said, Tibor, I don't know that much, but I'm willing to learn. And I'm not stupid. I think I can learn fairly quickly. If I can make some studio visits with you, and I can meet artists, and I can go to galleries and museums in New York, I think, and then other places as well, but I think I can do it. So he called Marvin. He said, Clint will be director. And Marvin was apoplectic, because he just never thought, he thought we had to have somebody that had connections, and I didn't have any connections. But I was the director for 17 years, so I guess I did something right. Houston was the place. In 1973, Janie Lee was just moving here. Betty Moody had just opened. Other established galleries like Hooks Epstein was here, and Dubose was still in business but under new management, and that's where Betty had worked before she opened her gallery. I sold my first piece to Renee Wallace, who's still my friend and a very active collector. She walked into the gallery. She just moved here from New York, and she said, Oh, I'm so glad you're here. This is just like a New York gallery. And she said, I am so happy. And then Janie opened, and that became the other kind of New York gallery. And then Texas Gallery opened, and all of a sudden there was this art market in Houston. There was a rash of galleries from New York and other places opening in here in Houston. So there was briefly a very important gallery that's now not so important. Wildenstein and Company opened in the Galleria area. A gallery specializing in sculpture opened here, and a gallery from Washington, D.C. opened a branch here. And so it was the deal. And Janie became affiliated with Andre Emmerich. We were still affiliated with Tibor Denaj, and we were showing people that Tibor showed in New York, and also people he had shown in New York, but who'd gone other places, but he still had a connection with. We were always considered the second gallery for these artists, because they had Andre or Nerdler in New York, they had John Burgoyne in San Francisco or somebody else, and Clement Greenberg would say to somebody like Ken Noland or Larry Poons, "Oh, you're not sending that to Houston, are you?" And they'd say, "Yeah, because they'll sell it." And we did. That was heady days, and I was going to studios with people that I was in awe of, but became friends. It was difficult and very expensive to show these people because you had to ship them down here. You had to guarantee them. Well, when that started, it was suggested to us by E.A. Carmine at the Museum of Fine Arts that we needed a backer. We needed a money person who could guarantee these sales. So he encouraged Meredith Long to become a silent partner. Well, it remained silent for about a month before he told everybody he was involved with the gallery. But he could front money to buy Motherwell's, to buy Nolan's, to buy Caro's, and he found buyers like Fayez Seraphim and other people who would buy those things. We did one of the first show of painterly realism in Houston with people like Jane Freilicher and Nell Blaine and a number of Neil Welliver and a number of people who at that time it became a very hot thing, cover of Art News, and nobody here was showing it. So we did a couple of shows, individual shows and group shows of those people. And then we moved over on Colquitt to Gallery Row. We actually, Moody Gallery and us kind of started Gallery Row, and then the actual building where more of the galleries with then Davis McLean and Jerry Hooks and New Gallery, Tom Andriola and John Clary, and around the corner was another photography gallery, and so that's when it became Gallery Row. But that's also when the economy started to slide a bit and the oil prices went down, and we just couldn't make it. At that point, Marvin couldn't pay the artists. I was just an employee, and I had really bad feelings about artists not getting paid, and Marvin kept saying to me, "We can't keep the doors open if we pay the artists, and then we won't be able to sell anything." And it was this horrible, and Marvin by that time had moved to West Texas and started doing architecture projects out there and growing grapes and making wine, and he wasn't really interested as much. So I became really the person. So when he sold it, I became chattel and sort of went along with the new owners of the gallery, and that only lasted a couple of years. And it wasn't what they thought I would, I could keep it going, and then they wanted to add artists that interested them, and they were not artists that interested me. What I didn't like was the dependency of artists on me, on the gallery, and all the woe me, I need money, and having to try to front them money, paying for their frames, and then having to give the work back framed, and you not recouping any of that cost. They didn't appreciate the fact that you were insuring the work, you were shipping the work, you were framing the work, you were exhibiting the work, you were doing invitations. Why are you taking 50% of what I do? Well, because it costs us that to do it. And I never made much money because I never worked on a commission until the new owners took over, and then they wanted me to work only on commission, and then they didn't pay me. So I said, I can't do this anymore. And they said, well, we're going to close, and you need to notify the artists they have to get their work back. And I said, that isn't the way it works. I got the work here, I'm taking the work back. So I rented the biggest truck you could rent at the time without a commercial license, and I drove from Houston to Toronto and dropped work off in New Orleans, in Washington, D.C., in New York City, in upstate New York, and all the way to Toronto, and everything got back, not at the artist's expense. I could not leave it that way, and I said, this is not the way we started, and it's not the way we're going to end. And they leased the space to another gallery, short-lived gallery, from a dealer from Austin who had money and moved here, and he opened, and I think he was there for, I don't know, a year or maybe two, and he again thought he was getting me with the sale, and I said, it doesn't work that way. I don't come with the territory. Well, then I was out of a job. First, I was offered a job with 3 galleries in Houston. And I realized that all they wanted was my mailing list and my clients. And I said, will I have any input in what artists you show? Because I'm trying to place the artists that I have been working with for a long time and find them a home. Well, no, we have the artists. And I said, well, then I wouldn't be your director, would I? If I didn't have any say. And so I sold them my mailing list to keep alive. And I worked briefly for several of them just as a filler. And I also was lucky enough to have it be a Photo Fest year, the year after we closed. And I had been contracted to do 3 or 4 exhibitions during Photo Fest, and I did those. And then the curator in Galveston had moved, and they interviewed me and said, we want to hire you. And I said, I've just gone from the no-profit business to the non-profit business. That's fine with me. But the difference is artists don't rely on you. There have been many more booms than busts in Texas. And the medical center has been built since I've been here. I mean, it is now what it is because of the last 40 years. Downtown Houston is what it is. And when I came here, it was not much at all. In 1970, this was not a major, it was a big city, but it wasn't a major player. But it all really boomed in 1973 when the Museum of Fine Arts opened the new wing, the Corpus Christi Museum opened, the Kimball opened. It was just like everywhere people were flying in from New York and doing the grand tour from Fort Worth and Dallas to Houston, Corpus Christi, these places that had these major new museums by major architects. I've been trying to be an art educator for all my career, as a gallerist and as a curator and director of a nonprofit space. So I go and I've spoken to students at the University of Texas, at Texas Tech, at Stephen F. Austin, at Lamar, about here's what you're in for, and here's what you need to do, and here's how it works. That's the biggest change, is that there's just so many more opportunities, but there are a lot more artists too. My mission was to show the best art being made in the region by artists living and working in the region, or projects made in the region. My bellwether was always my mother, who even at 95 would go with me to see art, and I'd say, well, what do you think? And she'd say, well, I don't know. I said, does it make you happy? Well, I like the colors. I said, that's good. Does it make you angry? No. Does it make you sad? No. I said, well, maybe I'll take just something that will make you angry or will make you sad, and then it will really be an experience with art. And she begins to, we've done it enough that she begins to get it and say, oh, now I see what you're talking about. It can just make you think, can't it? And I went, yeah, that's the best stuff, if it makes you think. But if it just is beautiful and makes you happy, that's probably really the best thing.